So welcome, hello. For those of you who haven't met us before, my name is Lindsay Kitching and this is Naomi Regan, and we are Directors of CAPE Coaching and Development. But what does that really mean? Because we can talk about our role titles and where we work. I guess in a nutshell, we are passionate about helping people thrive at work. And throughout this conversation, which is what this is, we call them our CAPE conversations, because we really want to talk about the things that matter when managing people. And throughout this conversation, we're going to share with you some of our own experiences through our roles as leaders and managers of teams, as well as what we've learned through coaching hundreds of managers and leaders and individuals and working with leadership teams over the last 6 or 7 years. And our focus area for today is all about change and uncertainty. And what a week to start off with, I guess, in terms of change and uncertainty. Whether you are somebody who enjoys the political world and you're an avid contributor to that world, or whether you're somebody that sits on the outskirts, you can't have missed the feelings and sentiments of change and uncertainty that have happened due to the presidential elections this week. And that change, that uncertainty is not alone in this week. It's not an isolated occurrence, is it? We are experiencing external change to us, our lives, our organisations, as well as internal change constantly. And that's why people talk about change leadership, or the ability for those that manage others to be able to embrace and almost harness and work with change and uncertainty rather than against it. And that's what we're going to spend this next sort of 50-60 minutes doing, is really exploring this, and we'd love you to contribute towards that discussion. So we're using the Zoho platform here, so a little bit of housekeeping first. There is a Q&A function which you can put any questions or comments in, and they will just be seen by you. So this really is this place to ask any question, and we will read those out, not necessarily attribute them to your name unless you want them to be, but please do share with us where you are in terms of change and the people that you work with. We know, looking at the list of people here, we've got joining us, some people are managers, some people are enablers of others and supporters that work in HR. So you're coming at this from lots of different experiences. As I said, we are recording this webinar and we will be able to share it with you as well afterwards. But Naomi, do you just want to say a quick hello and a little introduction from you?
Yes, welcome. Thank you, Lindsay. Welcome to everyone that's joined. I think you've introduced it really well. This is very much for us an opportunity to talk about a topic that is very close to our hearts, both from our own experiences, but probably what led us into doing what we do now as well. Quite often we have guests on these on these conversations, but for this particular one, we felt it was going to be a really nice opportunity for us to maybe chat through some of our own personal experiences too.
Thank you. Yeah. And this is, I guess, one of these things where we do all have personal experiences. We do bring with us the feelings, either the positive feelings or maybe the challenging feelings of going through change, as somebody that's maybe been on the side of organising that change or maybe receiving it. And so we're going to look at it through both those lenses. But first of all, I guess, just to sort of set the scene, and also to explain why this matters. There are statistics out there from every research body that you can probably think of, your McKinseys, your Gartners, Deloitte's, Accenture, that all talk about the scale of change that's happening across our organisations from their research, but also how prepared we feel for that change, and then how people feel about that preparedness. So, I shared some of the statistics as part of the sort of marketing material around this webinar, but 60% of managers actually do see change as positive and a pathway to growth. However, over half of leaders feel unprepared for the challenges that come with it. So we know that actually there's opportunity, but actually we don't feel prepared for how we harness that opportunity, and I guess move away from and help others move away from the perceived or the real negative or challenging impacts of change. And 43% of employees feel their workplaces aren't able to handle change effectively. And then we hear from leadership teams who they don't think that their leaders are ready to handle change effectively. And all of this sounds like quite, are we ready to handle change? Actually, we're already in it. It's already happening. And so, this isn't about us getting prepared for something in the future. This is about in the here and now, how can we do stuff straight away that's going to make an impact for us and the people that we work with. And now you might have come across this acronym VUCA in your daily work or your reading, but it really does for us. We use it because it captures the environment that we are living in. So VUCA is volatile, uncertain, complex and ambiguous, and it describes the environment that a lot of our working lives sit within now, that environment. So volatile is that things can change quite quickly, and when they do change they can be quite impactful. Uncertain means that we don't know some of the things that we need to know, and we haven't got the sort of the knowledge to help us bridge that gap and get there. Complex, because some of the problems we face now, there isn't an easy answer. There isn't a simple solution and a process we already have that can fix it. And that's where sometimes you hear this term, a wicked problem. A tame problem is something that we know how to approach. We've got a methodology, but a wicked problem requires us to think and work in a different way. And then the A, ambiguous, ambiguity. So things being at conflict, or where there's a paradox in terms of we want to do something, but we've also got to do something else. So let's just start to think about them. What are all the potential changes that could be happening within our organisation, small or large, that impact our sort of certainty and our feeling of change? So feel free to put these in the Q&A. I'm going to start one off and then I'll come to you, Naomi, because it seems to come up in every conversation I have with people at the moment. AI. I hope I'm not stealing your one, but AI, and what does that mean for us in terms of the world of work? What does that mean for us in terms of potential, but also threats that we might perceive? How do we know what we don't know yet? How do we understand what our world of work might be like in 10 years or even 5 years? That uncertainty can feel quite heavy for people. Naomi, how about for you? What would you say?
So I think one of the things just to say is as well as these individual things that we can maybe pinpoint as being a change that's maybe making us uncertain, there's the layering effect of multiple small incremental changes. For me, I think the one that as well as AI, of course, that I recognize from being a leader myself, but also from coaching people, is when there are organizational changes in terms of structure. So to align to adapt to a VUCA world, often organizations need to think about how they structure, whether it's by function, by department, how teams are structured. And that therefore obviously causes that ripple effect through in terms of who people report into, what their remit is, how they collaborate with other parts of the business. All of these things make perfect logical sense, but the process of going through some of those changes and thinking about what it might mean for them and how they have to work in the future and the uncertainty that exists there, that's probably one of those changes that really causes people to feel quite unstable in terms of how they fit within an organization. Yeah.
Restructuring, organizational change is, and it probably was, you know, back in the day, that was probably one of the biggest changes that impacted people. And it didn't happen maybe that frequently, but when it did, you know, it was quite significant because people, you know, were thinking about their job stability and thinking about, you know, as you've described, a lot of those changes there. But now, you know, we have, and you use that lovely word there, that layering of change. So it could be system change, IT change that's happening, as well as people changes, as well as market and economy changes and our supply chain. It could be about how do we actually work in a way that we know we should, but that's a big change. So things like, how do we become more inclusive? How do we use the right terminology around supporting everybody within our workplace? Those are all small changes that, as you say, you know, when they build up together, can feel quite overwhelming. So some of those changes, they need to happen, but it doesn't stop people from feeling overwhelmed with them.
We're not suggesting, are we, for a second, that change is a bad thing. Change is a positive thing. Change is needed, and not everybody has a negative response to change, but everybody has a response to change. And I think that's the thing here, that if we're leaders of teams, we will have different people within our teams who all maybe have a slightly different response to it, have a slightly different reaction, or a slightly different interpretation. So it's not that, oh, we've got to make it all okay for people because everybody's going to be really worried. It's having to try and navigate when there's different reactions.
Yeah, so we've set the scene. What we're going to do is talk you through some of our experiences, as we said, about when we were in the workplace, but also from the people that we're working with now, and talking about what are those biggest barriers that come up when we think about change, and those barriers that might be, you know, external to us as well as internal to us. And then we're going to spend a little bit of time thinking about the human side of change, and because that's what this is, isn't it? We're all humans. As Naomi says, we all have a response, we all have an emotion. So actually, let's understand a bit more about, talk about three practical strategies, I guess, that you can take away and either put into place yourself or share with others, so that, you know, really we are leaving you at a place where you feel more confident and more equipped around that change and uncertainty. So let's start then with you in your leadership, your management roles, Naomi. You talked a little bit about some of those experiences there, but tell us a bit more about what you felt and saw as a manager in terms of those examples.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have experiences of both being part of designing change, creating the vision around where we want to get to, and also implementing change, maybe in the same kind of situations, but also perhaps in situations where maybe I was implementing somebody else's vision. And I think both of those, we think about where we sit. And for a people manager within an organization, sometimes we sit across both. So we have to do both at the same time, as well as our own responses. So we are implementing the change and we are also responding ourselves. So from those both of those experiences, I think if we think about the experience of leading and designing a change, pretty much every time a change is implemented, there is a really, really rational, logical, well-tested business case for why we need to adapt or change a process or an approach to something, and that has been tested and signed on to by the most senior levels of an organization. But the challenges, and the challenge that I found is then, so much work's being done on that. When it comes to implementing, there's that really big void often between those who have to embed and implement a change and those who have designed it. And I think some early experiences of mine were not necessarily recognizing the impact of that void that we can create. You know, for my preferences, I actually really got quite excited when there was a new change initiative to be part of. And I don't have a preference for working on the same kind of routine tasks over and over. I quite like that novelty and that ability to work in different ways, and recognizing that not everybody, that isn't everybody's response, and that that approach that I might take really has to be adapted so that I can, you know, that phrase, bring people along with me. I think there's a really important thing here about, you use the word paradox, Lindsay, and I think very often when we think about management and leadership, we have to walk this line between two different types of tensions. We have to be both this and this. And when we think about change, there has to be both stability and change. And it's not the fact that that tension has to be, we have to fix it or solve it. We have to find ways for those two to coexist and to support people in that flux. So yeah, that's some initial. What about you?
Yeah, I think my experience is similarly. Sometimes I had more information about a change that was taking place because I was part of it, or sometimes it was that, you know, this is it, you're the manager of the teams, you need to make it happen. Oh, and by the way, we don't want any dips in productivity or performance while, you know, you do that. So that, you know, in terms of thinking about a paradox there, it's that, so how do I, you know, keep doing the work that, you know, we need to do as a team, keep people motivated, and, you know, perhaps sometimes when I've not felt motivated as well, and then, you know, help move through it when you don't really have perhaps all the information. And I think that's the hardest thing. And certainly, you know, when I think about as well people that we're working with now that we coach, is the, you know, that how do I do this for others when I'm really struggling to do it for myself? And it feels like you have to pretend, and you have to put on a brave face, and you have to, you know, not say anything, because if you did start talking, then, you know, are you saying the wrong thing? And I think that goes, you know, perhaps hand in hand with our view of leadership in general, that thankfully now is changing, and we're starting to see that people can be more honest and can show more of that vulnerability around, yeah, this is impacting me too. However, this is a way that we can move through that. And I think it goes back to that what you said again, is that we all have a response. It's what we choose to do with that response and how we choose to act on it. And so I think that's through then my experience of being part of a lot of change. And we, I remember in one role, there was, I think 3 or 4 years of successive restructures, one after another, and it became, you know, it became quite, it was difficult, but it also became like, oh, here's another one, what's going to happen now? And I think through experience, we developed a resilience and a coping strategy of how to move through that continuous change, albeit there was, and this is a word that's talked about a lot, change fatigue. That fatigue had an impact on the work that we did. So you learn to have coping mechanisms, and as a manager, you learn through perhaps the war wounds, but actually, you know, and what we talk about now with people we work with is how can we help people not have to get to that point and get the war wounds, and to, you know, to have strategies that they can use. And, you know, that's what I remember, I think, you know, quite vividly, is this fatigue, but almost having to develop this thick skin to it, because it just kept happening so frequently.
And it's almost that, it's that bit between having, sometimes we focus on change management as a thing that's needed, and that's all about, you know, what systems need to be in place, what processes, how do we practically make this change happen, and then change leadership. And maybe titles get mixed over the two, but really we need both. It needs to be the really clear structural plan around the implementation steps needed for whatever the change is, where we're going to, what good looks like, or what the to be position is, where we are now, what the gap is, where we need to be at each stage, what people will see, the very practical stuff that comes within that change management discipline. But then also, what is often overlooked, or sometimes overlooked, is the change leadership. And that is about the people that are part of that, and their emotions, beliefs, mindset, preferences, all of the things that come through. And we can't really effectively deliver a change if we don't lead through that. We're not managing robots, we're managing human beings who all have lots of different things going on for them. And it's just being able to balance those two things as well. This is the paradox.
And that's what I've seen as well, is that the investment in terms of time and money was put into that first part that you described. And in fact, I remember being part of a big IT transformation change, and walking into one of the rooms. I was a service line lead, so I was sort of like, I guess, what they call the subject matter expert that's brought in for part of this change. And I looked around the room, and it was the call it Big Four bingo, because all of the, you know, the big consultants were there helping, but all with that harder side of change, I guess, in terms of the, you know, the as you say, the design, the benefits, the technical aspect. But when it came to thinking about the human side, that change leadership, and how do we really move the people through it, other than a few of these, you know, well, we'll do a ask us anything session, or we'll do a, you know, get everybody together for a, you know, a breakfast. Those big things were there, but none of the, what are the conversations that need to happen, and how do we equip our managers to have those conversations, just wasn't there.
Yeah.
So what about our experiences as coaches then? What have you know, if you could put it all together in a nutshell in terms of what you've learned through coaching people over the last sort of 7 years about change, what would you like to highlight there?
I suppose the first thing, the really important thing for me, that was quite a nice realization in a maybe selfish kind of way, is that a lot of the experiences that I had as a leader, I felt were quite unique to me, and were maybe because of my responses or my experiences. When I became a coach, and over the hundreds of people that I've worked with, what I know now is there are so many common themes about how people experience change. And I think one of the really interesting things is that often we don't necessarily really understand what is going on for us when a change happens. You know, that's level of, it's not just because we don't know ourselves, but we can always develop self-awareness. It's also because of the time that we have to actually reflect and think about, what is it that's causing this reaction, and what can I then do about that? Often we make assumptions about what the challenge is, and then try and fix that when that wasn't the real issue. And if I just give you an example of that, you know, I've coached lots of different people through change at their organizations, and I remember working with one particular individual. She always stands out for me because of the very we talk in coaching about how our emotions can be very visible, and we can sometimes display them in a non-verbal way. And I remember talking to her. She was, you know, I think finance director, and they were leading you know, the organization through a big IT transformation in terms of the finance systems. And every time we spoke about it, she'd kind of really sort of put a hand on her head, and just the obvious physical kind of strain that it was taking. And for her, it was initially, she started talking in our coaching about the challenge being, how does she get everybody on board? How does she get everybody to kind of keep delivering and performing, as well as having to upskill them in this new process that they needs to use? When she dug a bit deeper into it, really, that was some practical stuff that she could make a plan around. You know, she could make a plan around training and skills and around engagement. But what was really causing her the most strain was thinking about her own response to this. She was a subject matter expert, and she knew the systems inside out. Suddenly she was going to have to work in a way that meant she was learning as well, and that she didn't have all of the answers for her team, and she didn't know all of the technical details. And the impact of that on her being able to stand and present in a confident way was really, really challenging. But once she'd really unpicked and identified what the challenge was, she was then able to do something about that, because she knew what the issue was. She could resolve that issue. So helping people to really understand what it is that's causing some of the responses, because we like to think that you know, what we help people to do is realize and get more comfortable with the fact they're a whole person and they can take their whole selves to work. But when a change happens, it really is a collision of personal and professional, because of the you know, those reactions and those responses that we get. What about you?
This is it, isn't it? It's that you can't separate out the how will it impact the work that I'm doing and how will it impact me. And I think that, you know, and there's another paradox there, isn't it? It's like, how can I get comfortable with the bit that, and it's sometimes a bit that you don't want to say out loud. So that the example that you shared there really, really resonates, that bit of going, you know what, I'm going to not know something, and people expect me to know because I'm the leader and that's why I'm in this position. I'm meant to have the answers. And especially as it's, you know, an area of my expertise, I'm in that position now, I feel a bit exposed. And to say that, you know, maybe people don't have a space to do that day to day. So how can they, you know, find that space? And more importantly, then how can we as other managers and leaders create that for them? Yeah, I guess similarly to you, in terms of my experience of working with others that have coached, again, I've had people that have been either part of the change and you know, have more information, but also those that feel like they're very much sandwiched between the different layers. And this is this, I guess, middle management layer, isn't it? And we talk about, you know, people feeling squeezed, that there is directive from you know, senior leadership, and there is also then what's going on the ground. And so I remember somebody who's part of a large organization that had that very role, that they were a sort of in the middle, and it was like, how do I navigate this? How do I be able to influence upwards to let people know what is really happening and help them see that gap that you talked about in terms of the design of what was going to happen versus the reality of how it's playing out, you know, on the ground, as well as then, you know, how do I then not just be directive in terms of telling my team, well, you've just got to get on with it, this is what you need to do, but helping them feel that they've got some ownership and feel some level of empowerment. So again, you know, there were things that, you know, maybe were some straightforward things that the person thought of that they could do as we went through the coaching, but the thing that we came out with and that helped them move forward more was around noticing when they had these moments of tension, and rather than just, and this is the response that they were having, they were going out all guns blazing and trying to to do everything, and there was a very much a scatter approach to how they were working, whereas with some people I've worked with, the approach might be the opposite, and it's head in the sand, I'm just going to hide away until it all goes away. But actually, you know, what can I do? Where's the priority list of things that I can do that would have the most impact, and how can I make sure that I'm listening, and listening, you know, whether I can do anything and take any action, actually still listening and still showing up to listen, which that can feel really hard as well, can't it? And, you know, we talk about on some of our programs about that generous listening, where we put aside what's going on for us and we really sit there and listen to hear what people are saying, and you're having that ability to have empathy to say, I hear what you're saying, I hear, you know, how you're describing how it makes you feel, even if we can't do anything about it, or you know, change the change.
Yeah. And I think it's that idea again of responsibility. Quite often when we're leaders, we see that we take on maybe more responsibility than we're able to, or that we're capable, or that it's right for us to take on. And quite often in our coaching conversations, we are helping people to unpick really what is the responsibility that you need to hold here. And that is not to fix and to make everybody okay with it, with the change that's happening, or with whatever you're dealing with. It's to be a space where you can really let people feel heard. So let's just, maybe we'll open up a question and start to think about some of the barriers to change and some of the practical actions. But if I just ask the question, and you can pop your responses into the Q&A box, so we can see them coming through. What words, or, you know, what feelings, emotions, words come up for you when you think about change? Good,
So you,
bad.
yeah, I was going to say, you said exciting, new possibilities. For me, I would say, and it varies, doesn't it, depending upon where you are within this change. There's some, might be some, yeah, apprehension, nervousness.
Yeah, we have this. I have a word that we have very much created in our house, where we talk about people, my two children, being ex-nervous, and that's when they're this combination of excited and nervous at the same time. So when we go back to school, that's the word that we kind of created for them to describe that. But that's a really good, it's again balancing that tension of, you can be, these two things can coexist, excitement and nerves, doesn't have to be one or the other. So optimism, excitement, seeing some words coming in, apprehension, nervousness, scared, worry, opportunity, some more optimism, possibility. So there's a real balance, isn't there? And I think just from that, you can recognize, you know, when we've got such a, and there's more, there's other words around the similar theme, we can really see the vast spread of different emotions that might be coming up for people. And however you're responding is at a point in time a result of how you feel, your values, what's important to you, how you feel in the workplace and in the context of where the system within which this change is taking place. Previous experiences of change, whether that's been positive or negative or something in between, all of those things will factor into how you feel about a particular change at a certain time. It's not stable, it's not fixed.
And this is it, isn't it? It's that we're all arriving at a different place in relation to the change, but it's easy to make assumptions when we're perhaps, you know, designing it, or, you know, even if we're delivering it and we're not part of that we're going to assume that everybody's going to feel the same way, or we're going to assume that everybody's going to get to the place of accepting and embracing the change at the same time. And so, you know, there are models out there, and you're probably familiar with different models to help people understand the stages of emotions that we might go through. So there's the change curve, which was based upon the Kubler-Ross grief, stages of grief. There's the change house, which people use to try and understand the rooms that you might move through in terms of how you're feeling about change. But, you know, it's not linear. There's not a, you know, we move from A to B, but the change management processes that people design, even though they might say it's taken into account, it's not linear, they are, because organizations generally are driven by making the improvements to impact performance, to impact profit. And it's
Absolutely.
because, you know, it's let's get there as quick as possible. So, you know, that's what the tension, that's what we're up against, is that everybody, you know, is moving through change differently, but we've got to get to it at this time, at this place, because that's the moment of when we've got to deliver the shareholder return, or that's the moment where it's the end of year and we've got to show that we've made a cost saving. So how do we manage that? How, you know, that's one, I think, the biggest barriers is, yes, we're all humans, yes, we all move through it at different points and need different things, but we've got to do it in this time and at this cost for this reason.
And I think one of the, you know, if we think about barriers for a second, and we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about the human reactions and the challenges that presents. But yes, some of the barriers, like you said, around moving through change in a linear way, but actually sometimes putting more focus in a certain place and less somewhere else. So we really like Kotter's 8-step model, don't we, of change process. And what you'll find sometimes is that either the vision and where we want to get to, lots of time and effort's being put into that, to the point it's so over-engineered that when it comes to implementing it, the people who've created the vision are quite far removed from actually how it will, the reactions on the ground in the organization, or that we kind of get started because there's something that needs to happen. We see some quick wins, and we then don't spend the time in making it stick, in embedding the change, in adapting and updating processes and systems. So there can be human responses which can cause challenges around change, but actually very practical organizational barriers in terms of how it's managed as well. So should we ever think about the human reactions a bit more then?
So we've already talked about this a little bit, and when we think about change and we think about uncertainty, a big part of our response to it is down to our preferences that Naomi's talked about, and how, you know, we've experienced it before, but also in terms of our natural innate preferences and our values, what we think about change. But there's a human physiology factor that sits behind it, that, you know, the way that we evolved, the way that our brains and our bodies were designed was to prepare us for danger. And, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago, when there was real danger out there, when we, you know, lived in caves, we needed to protect ourselves and protect, you know, our people that we were with. So the brain developed in a way where it had a way of sensing if there was a perceived threat or perceived danger. And when there was that perceived threat or danger, it created the response to support us. So, and that's where we get to when we have the flight and fight and freeze and flop response, is that, you know, our amygdala would have released the hormone signals that then would have protected us to keep us safe. And so fast forward now into, you know, the year 2000 and odd, and our body still, when it perceives there to be a threat, or when it doesn't have an answer for the challenge that's posed, when there's a gap, when there's some uncertainty, it will still release the same signals from the brain to the body to prepare us for danger. So we have this place of, we don't know what's going to happen. So actually, let's protect, let's fill that gap with worst case scenario. Let's look for all the evidence that backs up its worst case scenario. And there's this other little bit in the brain called the reticular activating system, where that's where we do, we send messages from the brain saying, I need to look for information to help me make decisions on action. And in a funny way, it helps us look for things that, we might not realize we're looking for. So say if you wanted to buy a new car and you were thinking, I want a blue Volvo, and you go out and all of a sudden you're seeing blue Volvos everywhere. Now, it's not that all of a sudden there's more of them have been made and there's more of them on the road. It's that your brain is looking for it. So during that time of danger and perceived threat, perceived danger, your brain then is looking for all the cues. So, if I'm in the workplace, well, somebody said something there. What does that mean? I'm not sure. It's going to mean worst case, or they didn't say anything about it here, so it must mean that something bad is going to happen. So as humans, we've got this, very clever, very sophisticated natural protection system that unfortunately doesn't support us for the world that we live in now. So you've got some stuff around this as well, haven't you, around some research about what we know?
It's really fascinating, some of the research about this, and some of it is that the thing that really stood out for me when I read it was about we actually prefer often a negative outcome than an unknown one. So studies were done where people were hooked to kind of heart monitors and stress monitors to see their level of response to a situation, and they were driving to a particular place and they hit traffic, and those people who it was touch and go, it was borderline whether they were going to make it on time, were more stressed than those people who actually they knew they were not going to make it, and they could make a call or pull over and make arrangements and let people know and have a plan. That the outcome of definitely going to be late was preferable to the outcome of I may make it, I may not, from a response point of view. And it's that we fill in the gaps, and we often, like you said, kind of revert to what might be the worst case scenario. It's like that void. I always have this visual in my mind if we're thinking about this state, especially when we're thinking about change, that it's almost like that in a circus, a trapeze artist is swinging from one solid grip on a swing to another solid grip. And there is a moment when they have let go from one side and they're swinging to the other one. And they're in this period of no longer there, but not yet there. And the time that is spent in the no longer but not yet, that void in between, is the challenge. And I work a lot with social workers, and within that context, there's a term that's used around safe uncertainty. So the context around it in that sector, it's not specific there. It's this idea that with a level of a foundation of security, a foundation of knowing kind of what's coming and what to expect, or at least knowing what we can know, we're able to operate much more effectively. We're able to be more innovative. We're able to be more creative and open to change. And some of the really practical things we can do to create this idea of safe uncertainty is explain what we know, but also what we don't know, is to not create a void where there is no communication. And what we say to people quite a lot is explain what's not changing as well as what is changing. So if we use the example of an IT system, again, we can explain that actually what matters to us and what we want to report with this new IT system will remain the same. Our intention and what we want to achieve, we are looking at changing this to allow for that. So it's explaining to people that these things are staying the same. There will be stability here, but there'll be change here. And that's a way of balancing those two tensions, but also working towards creating, as much as we can, this safe uncertainty for people.
I love that metaphor of that swinging from one and being in limbo almost. And, you know, what we can do is, if we can, is reduce the amount of time that limbo is there for. So, you know, if there's a period where we're leaving people with missing information, can we reduce that period? If we can't reduce the period, actually, what can we do during that time around communicating what's going on, communicating you know, the knowns, helping people really feel heard about what's going on during that time. And it really goes against that saying, doesn't it? No news is good news. Where did that come from? Because actually what we know from, you know, our human response is that no news is, we perceive it and we make up things, and, you know, it's not helpful. So
over communicate.
But do that with being authentic, and do that with, you know, with real intention and real purpose, not just, you know, ticking a box, being really clear on what's going to help. So let's then go on to then the three things then. So we've talked about, you know, and hopefully what we've shared with you, you recognize some of this stuff in terms of how you've had experiences and the people that you work with. But let's think about then, okay, three things, or three areas that actually you can take away to help you really embrace change with confidence yourself and help others. So the first one, and we've weaved this in throughout, is around emotions, emotional awareness. What can we do with this?
So yeah, that idea of emotional awareness, and it's almost connecting with what makes us human. We will have responses to whatever situation we're in. We have an emotional response, and emotions are precursors to action. So they will kind of, you know, they'll drive the action that we take. But quite often we aren't, as human beings, that emotionally literate in terms of knowing exactly what we're feeling. We will often respond based on, or we'll give an emotion a label. So we're angry, we're scared, we're sad, those big labels, without really recognizing what sits underneath it. So if somebody was very angry as opposed to very worried or fearful, they might get a similar kind of physical response, but actually what the action that they will take to help, or that they could take to help, would be quite different. Even a nuance between angry and frustrated, you know, what we might do about that is quite different. So we offer, as the first sort of tip, is to really develop that emotional awareness. And that doesn't mean that we have to be able to label all of the emotions that are going on for everybody, but whether we like it or not, within the interactions that we have, emotions will be present. And when we're dealing with change, how can we help those to not be so under the surface and bring them to the surface a bit more? I really like the phrase, to name it is to tame it, is to claim it. So when we can name an emotion, you know what, I'm feeling quite whatever it is about this situation, it almost takes a bit of the power out of that emotion, that can it can tame it, and we can have some choice in how we might respond. So there's an openness, creating an openness to exploring. And one of the ways of doing that, if we, you know, we can ask people how they're feeling about a situation and really listen, or we can use one of the two models that you shared, the change curve, or the change house. That's a new one on me, and I'll be exploring that one. But the change house, and the difference is that it's a bit more circular than the change curve. And we can use that, and we can actually sit with people and say, where are you right now on this? What's causing that? What would you need to move on from that? What's going to be most helpful now? But by positioning it in, you know, the emotions that we're feeling, it really helps people to connect with that and to people to move forward. Quite often we have this misconception that, you know, there are such a thing as a negative emotion, and that they're bad. Actually, by concealing what we might think of as difficult emotions, we're not able to move past them and move forward. And if you want some resources on this, there's somebody called Susan David, who's a professor in the States, and she is a great one to follow on LinkedIn, written some really great articles and books around normalizing emotions at work. It's not a fluffy, soft thing. It's actually critical to people being able to deal with periods of uncertainty and deal with work situations.
And I was going to say, what's important is that we do this all the time, not just because there's a change project or something happening. The more we can do this and, as you said, normalize it and bring it into our everyday, the more it then feels normal as part of the times when it is difficult, it is sticky and tough. And, we had a conversation the other day about how, sometimes when people are feeling uncomfortable and they're noticing that emotions are happening with somebody else, they don't say anything. And they'll just, leave the conversation, leave the room or the virtual room, and, maybe talk about it with somebody else afterwards, or that person, you could tell they were really anxious. Well, when you're together, just bring it and say, I can see from how you're holding yourself that maybe, something's going on there. Should we talk about it? Let's just, explore it and bring curiosity to that feeling, whatever it is, so that you can support that other person to explore that feeling and move through it. So emotions, the biggest part of this, but having the space to help people move through it as well as for you to explore it. Second one we're going to sort of call out is about actually developing that resilience. I talked about it right at the start, but resilience isn't about the ability to bounce back. It's the ability to adapt and flex and move. And so for us in this VUCA continuous world of change, the ability to flex, the ability to adapt, the ability to be dynamic is a really useful skill to have. And actually, Joe, role profiles now for leadership roles that you see have that on it, the ability to adapt and flex. If we're rigid, if we don't move, if we don't see things in a different way, then we're going to be stuck. And so you might connect this with a fixed mindset and a growth mindset, which helps us in terms of that resilience. So a fixed mindset would be that, well, I can't move through this. I can't do it. I haven't got this ability. I haven't got this skill. Why does it always happen to me? Whereas shifting it to the growth mindset is, I can't do this yet, but I will be able to. And this is what I need to do. This is the support I need to move through that. This is what will help me. So resilience is very much about helping people see how they can develop those skills to grow, how they can move through that feeling of being stuck, and helping them see that potential, that opportunity, and in a moment where they might not naturally be able to do that. Is there anything you'd like to add around this as well?
I think there's also that a big part of resilience is often being able to use our energy in the most effective and useful way. And so quite often when we're going through, a bit like you were talking about how the human brain works and processes uncertainty, when we're going through periods of change, we can often be expending energy thinking about, what if this happens, what if this happens, what if this happens, things that are actually outside of our control. So being able to, we use a model, and there's different versions of it, but origins are Stephen Covey and the circle of control, thinking about what is within my control, what is it that I can affect and do something about, and what's out with my circle of control, and really thinking about how can I put my energy into those things that are within my control, is also really helpful sometimes to help people conserve the energy that they have to be used in the best possible way.
I've used that with teams going through change, and it is really, really powerful. Simple tools are the best, aren't they? But, you know, helps us to really think about what's in our control, what can we influence, and what do we just leave to one side. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I think the third one, you know, it wouldn't be a CAPE conversation if we didn't manage to talk about having conversations. But I think those last two that we gave, and a lot of the themes that have come up through our discussion today, have been about opening up the conversation and thinking about how we might approach that. And that's also not only what we might do in it, but the role that we might take in the responsibility that we might hold. So really making use of some of those elements of, we might call them a coaching style, but we might also call them a non-directive style. You know, if we think about the differences between a purely directive style and a purely non-directive style, it's that difference between telling, advising, owning the responsibility, and asking, being curious, opening up the discussion, and allowing the responsibility to not rest solely with you. And so using that style, using more of that non-directive style, really helps us to allow others to connect with what it is that maybe is the biggest challenge for them, how they're feeling, all of the things that we've talked about, and why we love this particular approach so much, and why we think it is really the key skill for leading others, is because it allows us to enable them to become resourceful. So we cannot fix and make it all okay for people within our teams, but what we can do is we can allow them to have a space to feel heard and listened to, and to help them work through what they might need to do. And using this style does allow us to treat each individual as a unique human being, recognizing that everybody will respond in different ways. It ensures that the accountability and the responsibility sits with them. But the other thing that's really important is that it's future focused, it's solution focused, it's about helping people to become unstuck. We often use that phrase. And it helps people to think about what they might want to do, what they might need to do, and empowers them to do that. We all learn from the experiences that we go through in any situation. But if we think about change, helping people to learn from what they can take this time to help them next time and become and be more resilient around change. So using that style is so key as well.
Yeah. So 3 of the main things that really matter, the main strategies that can help you as a manager there. And hopefully what we've done in terms of this last hour is talk through some of those experiences that help you feel that you're not alone in whichever angle you're coming from in terms of change, as well as helping you know what you're already doing, that you can keep doing and continue doing, and some of the things that really matter. In the last couple of minutes, please put in the Q&A if you've got a question or any reflections on what we've talked about. We'd love to hear from you. And just finally to say that within our management development programs, we bring in an element of how managers can do lots of this: the non-directive approach, the emotional awareness, the building resilience and moving through change. We also support organisations that are going through change with one-to-one coaching, with change leadership, preparedness sessions. So please do talk to us if you are experiencing or will be experiencing in the future this, because we'd love to come and help and have the conversation with you. So just having a look.
There's a question just come in. Shall I share? Do you want to just pick this one up? So I am being asked to lead a change in my team that I don't agree with. What should I do?
So from what we've talked about, really, it's getting curious with what is going on for you first. So why don't you agree with this? Where is this coming from? And I guess being able to have a conversation with somebody about that. So thinking about your immediate manager, perhaps to ask them to have a coaching style conversation with you to explore this. Thinking about then what's in your control, what can you influence, and what are the things that you need to communicate to others because they matter, they're important. But I think it starts with, for me, this point of, where is that disagreement, that uncomfortableness coming from, being able to get really clear with it before then actually thinking about how do I then take my team through this and what does that mean in terms of the delivery. What would you add to that?
And the only other thing I would add to that is it's okay. And I think if you asked any leader, would it be okay for one of your team to ask for more clarity around a particular change? I don't imagine there'd be many people who would say no. So being able to go back and say, I can't quite get clear on the reasons behind this, what the driver is, and to be able to support my team and to answer the questions that they have, I need a bit more on what the business is trying to achieve with this, where we're trying to get to. So yeah, opening that up as well.
Yeah.
So
we are out of time now. Thank you for joining us, everybody. We will share the recording with you, but we'd love to hear from how you found this CAPE conversation. We'll see you again soon. Thanks, everyone.